The nature of exploratory diving means that you never know exactly what you're going to find, and sometimes you get completely surprised. That's exactly what happened to us the day we discovered an unknown and very unexpected landing craft tank nearly 100 metres down and 20 miles to the northwest of Land's End. The wreck was really unusual, and it took us a long time and considerable research to realise exactly what it was that we'd found. Only then did we realise that we'd discovered the last resting place of at least some of the 55 men of the 9th Landing Craft Tank Flotilla who'd vanished during horrendous autumn storms in late 1944. You may ask, how did we manage to identify it? Well, we didn't find a bell or a maker's plate or anything that had a number or a name on it. Instead, this was just a good old-fashioned detective story. As you'll see in the full video later on, this wreck was a really unusual layout and had all sorts of odd features. Probably the key feature initially we found were two props similar to the ones that you can see here. You can see they're quite small on short drive shafts with mounted to what is clearly the underside of the hull with A-frames. The two shafts led to two diesel engines. That's relatively unusual for wrecks, so this was clearly, pretty modern. And then the final thing that we found that helped us not identify the wreck but realise what sort of wreck it was a ramp right at the front. There was no anchors or chains or anything like that. There was just a ramp. Once we put all these pieces together, then we realised that what this was a very large landing craft. We were then able to go into the archives and try and figure out why a landing craft might be in this area, and that's when we came across the horrendous story that I've already introduced you to. You may be wondering why these landing craft were here. After all, D-Day had taken place earlier in 1944. Well, the Navy were in the process of moving large amounts of their amphibious capability from the UK over to the Far East, presumably as part of the plans for the invasion of Japan and the islands around it. So they'd collected up landing craft and other vessels from Glasgow, Belfast, Liverpool and Milford Haven. All of these craft were assembled into a large convoy towed by freighters with some destroyers for protection and even a few submarines. It's incredibly sad that they hadn't even got as far really as leaving our waters before they were hit by this horrendous storm that resulted in so many of them sinking and so much loss of life. What's amazing to me is that even though this is easily within living memory, this horrendous tragedy seems to have been almost completely forgotten about. Certainly I'd never heard of it. The good news is, though, that there are plenty of archive records from the period, and because not everybody died, there are some unbelievable survivors and counts, including this one here from the senior lieutenants on board LCT 488, which is the one that we think we found. It talks about days of horrendous weather, hatches getting smashed in, machinery failing, water coming on board, and then, when the inevitable does happen, it gets even worse. There's talk about panicky crew, people unwilling to leave the vessel even when it was clear that it was sinking, and then, in the final paragraph, he talks about what happened to himself. Having spent days trying to keep his LCT afloat and his crew alive, Sub-Lieutenant Steele finally had to abandon ship. At night, in a howling gale, in October. He then spent 3 hours in the water before being rescued. It's an amazing survival story, and I'd love to know more about what happened to him after this event. Unfortunately, there's nothing in the records. You may be interested as to where this was happening. Well, we were operating out of Newquay on the North Cornish coast, and that's roughly where our dive site was. The sinking reports for the majority of the LCTs though were well off to the west. Another reason why we weren't expecting to find one. This is a diving video though, and you're probably all wondering what's going on. Well, I've been descending down the shot line, following my frequent buddy Rick, and if you can see the strobe flashing in front of me, that's him. Conditions aren't particularly great. You can see the visibility is a lot poorer than on many of my other videos, and I'm here scootering down to 100 metres. Well, what does that look like as a dive profile? Well, I'm not going to get very long down there. 25 minutes, absolute max on this dive. And then I've got several hours of decompression to look forward to before the end of the dive. Giving me a total run time on this one of about 2 hours and 25 minutes. The good news for the video is that after a long descent, I'm finally getting close to the bottom. You can see in front of me there, Rick. He's tying in the shot line using a waster. I'm going to leave my scooter to dangle now while I attach my strobe. That's obviously really important to help us find our way back. The good news is, while I'm doing that, you can see Rick. Not intentional, my scooter's just dangling, but Rick's sorting out all his admin. I'm going to grab hold of my scooter now, turn it back upright. I'm going to start heading off. The first thing you can see is how poor the visibility is. Not only has it been kicked up from the shot, and probably by what we're doing, but it is just generally poor. I'm coming onto the wreck now. This looks pretty standard so far. You know, it's fairly well broken. It appears quite small. What I don't realise though is just off to my left hand side there was an engine, and this thing in front of me that I'm just scootering past, I should have spotted it, but I didn't until I was on the surface. That was actually an inverted gun mount. Turns out to be one of the anti-aircraft guns that were fitted. The LCT had 2, possibly 3. The actual gun's buried in the mud, but that was the mount for it, kind of cone shaped. I'm now on the rest of the wreck, trying to figure out what's what. Normally on steamship wrecks, you're looking for things like engines, normally compound steam engines or boilers. Now clearly there's nothing like that down here. It's quite a bit of trawl gear, quite a bit of rope, but no sign of any of the usual sorts of things. You can also see one of the other divers down there off to my right. We actually went down as a 3 because it was the 3 of us on scooters. So we're racing around, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to find something that's of interest. There's that trawl gear again. Some poor fisherman lost all his bits and pieces. Now I've put my scooter down here. It's resting on the wreck. I'm not sure why I've done that, but it's probably in order to free my hands up to do something. Whatever it is, seems like I'm off again. There's that trawl gear again, and then look in there. Wow, that's a small bronze propeller. So that's interesting. Clearly I'm at the stern of the ship. So I'm now heading up the other side. And you know, what I'm doing at this point is I'm looking for something else. I know that if I head from the stern forward, I'm going to eventually hit the engines and the boilers. And that, at this moment in time, is what I'm looking out for. I still think I'm diving on a steamship. So here there's loads of pipes and cables. You know, the cables in particular tend to be associated with kind of later wrecks. So you don't get much electrical stuff on World War I or obviously earlier. So loads of cables probably means it's either in between the wars or Second World War. So here I am moving forward. Once again, you know, really looking out for that engine and boiler. Not seeing anything. Just all this kind of, this odd superstructure. You know, quite thin ribs, quite thin, you know, well corroded plates. You can see the other divers up there with me and we're both heading forward. No sign of any of the kind of stuff we're looking at though. Really, really kind of confusing and unusual. As is often the case with deep wrecks that are a long way offshore, there's loads of fish down here. They're quite big ones. I'm sure they'd be really tasty. They're also not in the least bit concerned about divers and are actually really interested in our lights. Any moment now, one of them is going to swim into the scooter and the camera. So here we are. We're swimming forward, or rather we're scooting forward. There it goes. That's the one just hits me. I'm scootering forward, looking for anything really. I've missed the boilers, if there are any. This is quite a long way forward. I'm now at the front of the wreck. It's nothing, just this kind of big piece of plate. I didn't recognise it at the time, but it wasn't until later on that I realised what I'm actually looking at here is the landing craft ramp. This was the thing that would be lowered up and down and allowed tanks to get on and off. Just seemed like a really odd piece of hull at the time. It wasn't until later on that we started looking at the photos and everything that I realised that's exactly what it was. What there isn't though is any of the other stuff that you associate with the front of a ship. There's no capstan, there's no anchors, there's no anchor chain. There's just this kind of odd, hull construction. It all makes sense once you realise it's an LCT, but at the time it was really confusing. I guess at this point it's also worth mentioning I made a major faux pas on this dive. As the first set of divers down, we have two main jobs. The first is to make sure that the shot is secured into the wreck using the waster, and you've obviously seen Rick do that. The second is to release the pill, which is a small buoy. This lets the divers on the surface know that the shot is in and secure so they can get in. Now unfortunately, although I did release the pill, it got stuck under my arm, so the other divers never actually, or some of them never actually got in the water. That meant that when I got to the surface several hours later and the pill was spotted under my arm, I got a huge amount of abuse, and quite rightly. These people had spent a lot of time and paid a lot of money to get out to this far. Of course, my view is always that you should get in, even if there isn't a pill. You always miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Anyway, back on the wreck. Once again, I'm scootering around and all there is just bits of plate and bits of ribs. There's nothing that looks like any part of a ship. I still haven't seen any boilers or engines or the kind of things that you associate with a steamship. All there is loads of silt and mud, which has been kicked up by the other divers. So not great conditions. Anyway, I'm on the side of the wreck once again. Still going. I've been to the front. I'm now heading back towards the stern. Hoping that I'll spot, frankly, whatever it was that I missed. But there's no joy. As I say, at this time, I'm really confused. You normally know what to expect on shipwrecks, and you're normally able to get your bearings pretty quickly. Absolutely nothing with this one. Even the other divers, you can see everyone's sort of scootering around, desperately trying to find something. There's three of us down here on scooters, and none of us has really, gripped the wreck and kind of realised what there is. All we've seen really is that bronze prop. There's actually two, which you'll see in a moment, and these are the things when I get back to them that actually start to give us our first clues about what it is. There's a bit of a bronze valve down there. So clearly I'm back in and around the area of the engine, and more wiring, some kind of box structure there. What is this? I realise this has got to be it. Now, I don't realise it until later on, but what I'm actually just been looking at there is one of the two diesel engines that there are on this. But I'm not thinking about diesel engines at this time. I'm thinking about steam engines. I know what they look like, and they don't look like that. So here I am, back at the stern. You probably saw it a moment ago, but there's one of the props is just off to my right hand side, so it's above that trawl gear. But here I am at the stern, really confused, hoping really for a kind of nirvana moment. So there's, as I say, there's one of the props. There's another diver over there. It's probably Rick taking some photos. So I decided probably the best thing to do is to get some decent video of that prop. It looks relatively modern, three-bladed, curved. You know, that's not the sort of thing you'd associate with a really old steamship. There's another one there. Actually, if you look at it closely, you can see it's on an A-mount on the underneath of the hull, and there's the prop shaft leading away from it, no doubt towards the engine. But it's quite confusing. There's lots of wreckage, lots of ropes, lots of trawl gear. But as I go up here, there's the gland where it would go into the ship, and just up here, you're going to see the engine very shortly. I think that's probably the end of it. Yeah. And there, off to the left-hand side, I think I'm going to video it in a second, is the engine. I'm still confused because I'm not really thinking about diesel engines. I'm thinking about other things. No idea what that is, but clearly it's some sort of something for sort of transferring through 90 degrees. Potentially that might be part of the rudder system. I'll be honest, I don't really know. I'm just guessing at that point. But underneath me here is the engine. It's actually upside down, which is a pity, because if it was the right way up, I'd probably recognise the valves and stuff on the top of it. It's also possible that there may be some sort of plate on it that might have allowed us to identify it. There you go. That's the diesel engine there. As it is, we can't conclusively identify this wreck. We know it's a landing craft by the construction. There's some sort of electrical board, you know, maybe fuses or a junction board or something, you know, quite old, but clearly indicates that there's a lot of electrical stuff on this wreck. I think I've probably just put the scooter down, maybe while I try and pull something out. Might be that electrical board. And then I'm off again, really, you know, just trying to make some sort of sense of this. I mean, there's loads of sort of stuff here that you'd associate with kind of machinery spaces. You know, you've seen the pipes, you've seen a lot of wires. As I say, that's really indicative of a kind of a more modern wreck than the late 19th, early 20th century steamships that we're used to diving. So another really good clue that this is, you know, probably Second World War, and tied in with the design. I think that's probably one of the other engines there. There's clearly some sort of pipe with some insulation around it. Probably asbestos, I guess, from the era. You know, don't want to be touching that really. That's the other engine, I think. So I've realised that this is an important part of the wreck, and I'm just trying to video everything I can in the hope that something may prove useful in identifying it. Actually, what is really useful is the two short prop shafts with the two props and those A-frames that I mentioned earlier on. There's actually one on both prop shafts. Once again, when we were able to look at the designs of LCTs, it became really obvious that that's what this was. If you think about it, a landing craft tank goes up to a beach. The ramp is obviously at the front, and that's how stuff gets on and off. So you want that to be as far away as you can from the props. You also want all the engines and stuff at the back, because the tanks and everything are going to be in the front. So this bit here is probably the most intact bit of the wreck, just off to my left hand side. In fact, here you can see some box structure. There was a bit of a ladder earlier on there as well. So I've no idea what this was. It's obviously part of the bottom of the LCT, because the LCT is upside down. That's why the props are upright. And I guess that probably figures when you think about how it was sunk. You know, these things filled with water and then went down, and inevitably in that kind of those kind of conditions, they would end up inverted, and down they went. So that's how come it's on the bottom. That's how come it's inverted. That's how come we were able to see the props and the inverted engines, but nothing like the wheelhouse or any of the bridge gear or unfortunately anything that would be helpful in identifying it. I think I've just stuck my nose inside part of that that upright structure, and you can see here that by doing so I've absolutely trashed the vis. I'm now accelerating out of it, and you can see there I'm going to go back, I think, to the bits, the only bits that look like part of a wreck, and just, you know, have another good look around, using the rest of my bottom time to see if, you know, maybe, just maybe, I can identify something. You can see the strobes, you can see there's other divers down here now, you can see the torches and stuff. This is back in a bit that I've kind of been, where all these cables and stuff are. You know, maybe above those, although below those in the orientation it is now. That's where the bridge was. There's another diver on their scooter. You know, once again, we were all equally confused. And it wasn't until we were sort of talking about it on the way back and started to consider what type of ship may be laid out in this way that we came up with the LCT thing again. There's whatever that is for rotating stuff through 90 degrees. Who knows? It's a fairly big bit of kit though. There's one of the prop shafts again. Off to the left hand side you probably saw some lights. I think that was Rick who was taking some photos of the props. I'm going to put some of his photos up later on. He likes to leave video lights on the seabed, as he has done there, to kind of illuminate what he's looking at. I'm going to provide a bit of extra light, but that does allow you to really clearly see the A-frame there, which is mounting the prop on. Also clearly see the prop and the prop shaft heading back, and in fact the bottom of the hull there as well. There's a bit of it left. Also, I think, is a really clear indication that this wreck is upside down. So those of you who've seen my other videos know that I often do this when Rick is around. If I think he needs some light on something, I'll kind of stay in one position, use my lights to kind of enhance the light that he's already got, which generally makes for better photos. Also, it's great because it means that I sometimes get in the photo as well. So that's what I'm doing. I reckon he's had enough time to take photos now. There's a bit of big old net down there. Loads of silt, so I'm off again, heading back towards where the shot is, and that's obviously where we landed on the bottom. I can't believe I've got that long left. I'm not sure there's going to be that much more I can do down here, so it's I think it's probably time for my dive to come to an end. Oh no, I'm just going to video that engine once again. And I think it's really clear from this bit of video that it is a big diesel engine, inverted. You can see the cylinder head at the bottom there. I'd love to have been able to get underneath, because almost certainly there's a plate on there that would help us identify the engine. And you know, if we could get a serial number off it, almost certainly identify the LCT as well, because records are that good. Yeah, I've been here quite a few times with all these cables. I guess just hoping that there's something that I may have missed. Doesn't seem there is. Just more silt and more smashed up wreck, and nothing that looks like anything that I recognise at this time. So it's going to be really frustrating on the bottom, but actually, once we start to put the pieces together and realise what it is we found, it's actually something I'm really proud of, actually, to kind of give that sense of closure for people who are still, people who still knew people on this wreck. And there is quite a lot. If you go onto the Combined Ops website, I'll put that in the chat, in the comments. There's loads of information on there. There's loads of photos of people who were lost on the various wrecks from the 9th LCT Flotilla, and some of the stories. One particular one that got me is a guy's granddaughter's posted about it. His grandmother, once she realised that her husband had been lost, emigrated to Canada after the war, and that's where the family has been ever since. So there we go. Final bit of a video of one of the diesel engines, and I think that is it. That is going to be my time up. and it's time to head back to the surface. First things first though, obviously what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my strobes. There's Rick, we've probably just communicated and I've told him that I'm going. We tend to head up to the surface at the same time. So there we are, my double strobe. I'm going to pick that off, and then we're going to start heading up to the surface. With the joys of a long boat journey back to look forward to, and also so a good opportunity to chat about what we found and to try and make sense of it. I mean that also shows just how dark it was down here. Dark and rubbish visibility. So not a dive that I remember with a great fondness. Apart from, you know, what it's done is it's solved another underwater mystery, and you know, brought to light something none of us were aware of, which is really nice. And as I said at the beginning, I think this kind of exploratory diving is full of surprises, and this was definitely one for us. Here I am, heading back up. As you know, I like to get up quite quickly. Not only does it, but as I'm going up, it would appear that one of the other divers coming down, and this is one of the guys. They were waiting for the pill, and they had a long chat on the surface about what to do. When we didn't appear, some of them were like, "Sod it, I'm going in," and in they came. And some of the other ones decided to stay on the surface. You can argue about what's the right decision to do. Ultimately, I have to say I'd have been doing exactly the same thing as this diver. I've touched upon quite a bit of the story behind the 9th Landing Craft Tank Flotilla, but the great news is, if you're interested in it, there's a load more online on the excellent Combined Ops website. I'm going to stick the link to this down in my comments, but hopefully you can see the sort of information there is on there. It's a brilliant piece of work, and I absolutely commend the guy who's put it together, who I think was the son of one of the guys who was sadly lost on one of the LCTs. The other really nice thing about this page is that it also has lots of the stories of those who were lost, provided normally by relatives, including some photos, and it also names every single person who was lost during this horrendous event. And I really commend you to go and have a look at it. It's a really important website, and I've had a ton of information off it. So I'd like to say thank you very much to the guys who put it together. Well, that's the end of another one of my videos. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, please, it would be great if you could comment or like, send it to your friends, subscribe, all the usual sort of stuff. And of course, feel free to watch as many of my other videos as you like. Thank you very much.